Our project was over the Yow stand invasive species removal. It's by Nick Bray,
and Kyle Cason.
and our stakeholder was Dr. William Moore.
As you can see here, this is a stand that we're working in, outlined in black. It's in relation to the Vernon Yow building and Ag Science building. The stand was not really well kept. It had lots of invasive species, which makes it look bad for us or the Yow building, because it's a forestry and wildlife building. And for us wildlife and forestry majors, we don't want to promote invasive species. We want to get rid of it and promote the native growth in the stand.
One of the main objectives given to us by our stakeholder was to focus primarily on removing Chinese tallow tree. Chinese tallow tree is an invasive, fast-growing tree. It can produce over 100,000 seeds annually. These trees were found throughout the stand, but they're especially more abundant in the southern part of the stand, closest to the parking lot. There's several saplings, as well as a very dense growth there's a lot of dense growth, period, in that part of the stand, but it's especially a high density of tallow trees. There's still tallow trees in the northern part of the stand in the back half, but there's not as many. But the ones that are there are very large. There's very large tallow trees back there, but they're primarily in the part of the stand nearest to the Yow building, which is unfortunate because that's the part that most people will see. We decided to come up with to use a hack and squirt herbicide treatment. This was also because our stakeholder wanted us to promote snags for, he said, and I quote, various critters will use them. And so we used the hack and squirt method to leave standing snags. And we did this by using hatchets and spray bottles with herbicide mixture, and then we would cut a notch into the cambium of the tree uniformly around all sides, or that's how you're supposed to do it. Our herbicide mixture was Glystar 41, which is a glyphosate mixture. And we used a 1% mixture with blue marker dye to identify all the trees we treated. We used 1% mixture because that's what was recommended on the label for tallow trees specifically. And we also used a basal treatment for the small trees that were less than 6 inches in diameter. The basal treatment involves painting the base of the tree with herbicides to absorb through the bark into the cambium, since they're smaller trees. This just allowed us to work a little more efficiently and move faster through the process, because it's such a unruly stand. It was just a lot of work. And on the left, you can see a picture of Kyle working hard with a hatchet, maybe.
And as you can see here, this is what Nick was talking about just in the previous slide of the notches we cut in the trees. We cut the notches so when we applied the herbicide, it would hold the herbicide and that it wouldn't spill out or just drip down the tree. So hopefully the tree would absorb it and it'd kill it. And this is the blue marker dye Nick was also talking about. We use this so we can identify the trees that have already been treated, so we wouldn't backtrack. This is the rear half of the stand closer to the cattle pasture. As you can see, it's a lot more open in this back half of the stand opposed to the front half that was real thick. And there wasn't really as many tallow trees back here, but the ones that were back here were pretty big in diameter, I would say. And then right here on the left, you have a picture of like some type of palm, possibly a cabbage palm. That looks like it been growing there for a while. Here you see here's a pond cypress, not too very far in the stand, that was planted by Mr. Kip Hall years and years ago. It's a very nice tree that was almost completely obstructed by and concealed by black cherry trees, Chinese privet, muscadine vines, and unfortunately a few poison ivy vines that we had to pull out. That was a pain in the butt.
We elected to use hatchets and moppers for this part of the project instead of using herbicide. There's not really any point in killing the black cherry trees or any tree or anything really that was obstructing the view just to leave it standing, because it's still kind of blocking the area or the visual line of sight of the tree. So we just cut them down and removed them completely. We created a large open area in hopes that maybe it'll be used by a dendrology class, or for students to go down there and study. There's a bunch of different species right there, and we kind of made it an open area that's more easily accessible. We also thinned the stand from the pond cypress back towards the parking lot. You can see in the picture, you can kind of see through the parking lot. There's only like a few, like one little line of trees right there that's blocking from being able to walk right into the parking lot. And we kept those. For one, there's a few tallow trees there that we treated with herbicide, so we weren't going to cut them down. But also, it helps keep the shade. And we wanted it to be a shady area beside the pond cypress because it would just make it more convenient for anyone using it, especially in the summer months or the early fall, late spring, depending on when you have class. It can be very brutal, hot, and it would just be, I thought it would be nice just to leave it a little more shady, but still nice and open. When we were working in the stand, though, it became apparent that this stand is not used at all, hardly. It's rarely used, if it is, and not really explored either. There's a lot of interesting things that were in there that we didn't expect to see. Here's a dove trap we found, and it had been there for a while. There was, I think it's a black cherry growing through it, but there's a whole limb growing through it that we had to cut just to pull it out.
Also, while we were in the stand, we came across a couple skinks that were just sitting there chilling on a log right here on the left and the side of a tree on the right. We thought it was pretty cool, something to take a picture of, maybe put on this presentation. We also found a few small burrows in the back half of the stand towards the cow pasture. Not exactly sure what type of animals living in here, possibly an armadillo, maybe a fox uses it as a den. We think it might be a fox living in this stand just because, as you'll see later in the presentation, that there was a few animal remains that we found. One was a waterfowl that we thought might been killed by foxes because of the big old bunch of feathers that it exploded all over the ground.
So I kind of gave the stand the nickname the Pet Cemetery just because of all the things we found, like Kyle said. Thought that was kind of neat. But here's the waterfowl remains. You can see the skull on the far left with a pile of feathers in the middle, and then some miscellaneous bones on the right that were found right with the skull in the same area. We believe it's a goose because it's a very large skull for a duck. It would be really too big. And the feathers are more of a gray color, and so possibly a Canada goose. And that's why we think it was a fox, because the way the feathers are just exploded off the bird, like it was attacked right there. We also found two snapping turtle skulls, one of which was still intact, as well as the plastrons of the snapping turtles. So if you look right here, you can still see some of the dried skin on the skull, and then some scutes still on the plastron, which it's come apart, but that's pretty interesting. We thought that there's a whole skull and even two turtles in such a small place. I know I've seen one snapping turtle walk across the back parking lot of the owl before. I just seemed like it came out of this stand, which was peculiar, but who knows? Now we found more.
Here was a buck skull that I found in the back half of the stand. As you tell, it was a buck skull because the antlers have been cut off right there almost at the base. Also, there was some rodent bite marks on the antlers antlers were left on the skull. Also, there was some rodent marks on the rostrum of the skull. The skull's definitely been there for a while. Don't know exactly how it got there. Wouldn't think would have been any remains of the deer that won the deer pen that got thrown out in there. So not exactly sure how exactly skulls got there, but we thought it was pretty neat as well.
Some of the issues that we had during this project were determining the boundary of the stand and what area to work in. I mean, it's pretty easy to see where the stand ends, especially from the picture on the map we showed at the beginning. But the real problem was determining how far or how close we could get to the cattle pasture without having to contact the beef unit or just worrying about a tree limb maybe falling on the fence or herbicide runoff or something like that, just to be extra safe. And Dr. Moore was originally going to flag off the area that he wanted us to primarily work in. That due to certain issues or certain unforeseen things, that didn't happen. So we came up with a consensus pretty much just to leave a boundary of a few feet. We decided about 6 feet to 10 feet was probably a good boundary around the fence line where the cattle were at, especially in the back half of the stand. There's a fence at the very end of the stand and on both sides. So 3 out of the 4 sides on the back half are adjacent to cattle's.
Another issue was locating all the trees in a very dense stand. At first, we had to cut our way into the stand because it was real thick. And then once we got in the stand, especially the front half of the stand, all the tallow trees were like in dense clusters throughout the front half of the stand, so it made it hard just to locate the ones we haven't applied herbicide to and the ones we didn't. So that's the solution we came up with, use a blue marker dye. As we said in the previous slide, we marked the trees with it and do a very thorough walk through the stand to make sure we didn't pass any trees that needed to be applied, or the ones that we didn't get to were the ones that were out of the boundary that was right there on the fence line.
The final issue, which is probably the biggest one for us, was just our inexperience in herbicide application overall. This was the first time we've ever actually, applied any knowledge about herbicides and used it. We knew how to mix the herbicides and measure them out and create the 1% mixtures and all that stuff and measure it out, but we never actually have done hack and squirt or basal treatment for that matter. So that probably caused some issues in our application. We may have made a few mistakes, but we'll get to that. Here's a picture of the cattle fence line. So if we were cutting in this area, what we would do is get about 6 feet to 10 feet between us and the fence and walk adjacent to it. If I had the fence to my right side, I would walk from the corner down. Any trees directly in front of me or to my left, we would treat. And we'd work our way from the outside in. That way we did not pass that threshold of 6 to 10 feet. And unfortunately, there were some really large trees right on the fence line that we weren't able to get. But there's also, in the picture, you can see the donkey. He would kind of just follow us down the fence. So I thought that was kind of funny. Our results, I think they're probably overall positive. We did treat all the trees that we could get to. I'm fairly certain we didn't miss any trees throughout the stand. We went through it very thoroughly. However, like I mentioned before, with our inexperience of herbicide, we may not have reached mortality on the larger trees just because we may not have applied enough herbicide, or we may not have applied it as uniformly around the tree as we should have on some trees. We did, though, effectively clear the area around the pond cypress, which was another goal of ours after doing the tallow tree. So that was a success, and I think it's overall a positive success because we did make significant progress in the stand that had no management at all. And our objectives were really basic to start with. I don't think we were expected to get as much done as we did. We were supposed to follow through with the hack and squirt treatment, and then the basal treatment on the smaller saplings was a secondary goal. And then with the extra time we had, we went ahead and cleared the pond cypress area out as like a tertiary thing. If we had known some of the things we know now, or some of the mistakes that we'd made before we ran out of time or earlier, we probably could have went back and treated it better, but it was just kind of a little late, too little too late for us at that point.
The next steps moving forward for this stand would be to do another walk through the stand and make sure the bigger trees that we did try to kill and didn't reach mortality rate, reapply herbicide to those larger trees. Maybe this time cut deeper into the cambium, just spray more herbicide into the notch of the tree that we made, and just cut more notches around the tree. And then once we get rid of all the Chinese tallow trees, you don't want another invasive species to take over. So we noticed that there were some Chinese privet in the stand as well. More so in the back half of the stand, there was some more of them over there. These were actually bigger ones, mature ones, but we did see some smaller ones in the front half of the stand, but the ones that we did see were in the back half of the stand. And maybe a method you could use later in the future would be use fire. Fire would be something, not only would it make the stand look good, make it open, you'd be able to walk through it, maybe use it for dendro class or something to walk through the stand, but also it'll keep from having those invasive species come back, like the Chinese tallow tree and the Chinese privet. You don't want that to come back. And also you want to promote native growth, not invasive exotic species. And also maybe this stand could be used for one of Kip Hall's fire class to teach on how to use fire as well.
Another thing I'd like to add is just that with the application of fire to that stand too, it'll help, because even in some areas where it's not necessarily invasive species or non-natives that are taking hold, it's just plants like black cherry that are creating such a thick growth of black cherries that you can't hardly get through the stand or see anything at all. And with fire, maybe just it'll thin some of these trees out, or the herbaceous growth that's really high and just kind of unkept, and it just doesn't look very well. So that would be another benefit, I think. But this has been our project. I hope you enjoyed it, and thank you for your time.
Thank you.